Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is City Talk. Kennedy and Nixon did it. So did Carter, Ford, and Reagan. As did Clinton and Bush 1 and 2. In the 2008 presidential campaign so far, the Dems have done it 26 times and the Republicans 21 times. And, oh yeah, Lincoln and Douglas did it too. They, quote unquote, debated. Some of these debates have helped decide elections. And here to talk about the nature and impact of debate in American politics is David Birdsell, Dean of the School of Public Affairs at Baruch College and an authority on political speech and communication, including presidential debates. He is the author, along with Kathleen Jamieson, of Presidential Debates, The Challenge of Creating an Informed Electorate. Welcome back, David.
Great to be here, Doug.
McCain, on the day after Obama secured the nomination, called for 10 town hall meetings to take place before the Democratic convention. Obama campaign responds, yes, we'll talk, but we want something longer. Just give us a brief history of presidential debates and how we got to where we are today. And then we'll talk more specifically about the nature and purpose of debates.
Debating goes back to the very beginnings of American political history, but presidential debating is a comparatively recent innovation. Kennedy and Nixon were the first people to debate in 1960 in a general election. But let me rewind the clock a little bit and go back to the 19th, even to the 18th centuries. It wasn't considered seemly for presidential candidates early in the nation's history to say anything on their own behalf, much less to debate an opponent. All of those arguments were undertaken by surrogates. So you would have people who supported the campaigns, people who would be the Governor Rendells of this campaign season, going out on behalf of the candidate to say good things about the candidate. In fact, William McKinley was the first candidate to speak in his own behalf, and we're going back only within 110 years.
You're right.
For that moment. So presidential debating comes out of the box with its most famous event with the Kennedy-Nixon matchup in 1960. We had that debate then. We did not have debates again in 1964, in 1968, or in 1972. And they were rekindled with the Carter-Ford debates in 1976. And we've had debates in every season since.
Now, you wrote Presidential Debates, The Challenge of Creating an Informed Electorate, in the 1988 election. It's 20 years later. What were your conclusions then? And if you were going to write an afterword to this, what would you write?
Well, the conclusions then were that debates are important, that debates matter, that formats should vary because some people do better in some kinds of formats.
And we'll talk about different formats.
And we should, because it really makes a difference, and it has some bearing on the question that you opened with about this idea of 10 town hall meetings, which clearly favor John McCain in some respects, but we'll get back to that in a little while. We also concluded that debates were here to stay, and we were writing just 4 years after Ronald Reagan agreed to debate Walter Mondale. And that was really a watershed moment because he didn't have to at that point. Lyndon Johnson didn't have to debate Barry Goldwater. He was going to win that election running away anyway. There was only a one election precedent for debating. So he said no, and he had the ability to do that. Richard Nixon, who had been burned in 1960, said, no way, I'm not debating Hubert Humphrey. And he didn't have to. When Ronald Reagan, way ahead in the polls, decided to debate Walter Mondale and said, I'm doing it because the people deserve to hear the representatives of the two parties debate one another for the presidency, he in essence ensconced debate in national political tradition. George H.W. Bush tried to get out of it in 1988, and essentially the press and the people wouldn't let him. And now it's inconceivable that people won't do that. So one of the things that we're looking at today, and we were celebrating this achievement only 4 years after the fact in '88, that we should look at now in 2008, now that these are an absolute lead pipe cinch. We know that they're going to happen. How can we look at building this institution and making people not only able to watch better debates, but better able to watch those debates?
Okay, let's talk about both of those elements. I mean, one asks, what is the purpose of debate? And I guess it's the subheading of the book, the challenge of creating an informed electorate. Do debates as they're currently structured, formatted, and played out, have they really informed the electorate? Are there ways to do it better? Talk about those types of issues.
No one campaign event, not a speech, not a debate, not a website, can provide you with everything you need to know about a candidacy. They're too complex. People are too multifarious. They present themselves in different ways at different times. But what a debate allows you uniquely is the opportunity to see somebody thinking in real time. You are much more likely to hear and see surprises and how a person deals with surprises than you are on a website, which people go into a dark room and work over on a, over a hot computer screen for hours at a time. This is happening in real time. And the fact that people prepare, the fact that people rehearse, doesn't mean that it isn't real, because they still have to go out and execute.
Right.
They have to know what they're practicing and preparing for. And even those selections, even the rehearsed lines, tell you something about how they want you to see them in this context and how they want to frame the contest for that election campaign.
So, I mean, clearly there may be a distinction between an informed electorate, that goal, informing the electorate, and the goal of winning a debate or not blowing a debate. Well, so, I mean, the campaigns have a strategic objective of winning. If it necessitates informing the public, that's a byproduct, not the central focus.
Well, to go back to the first clause of your last question, you asked about purposes and posed that against creating an informed electorate. The purpose of a debate will vary dramatically depending on who you are. If you're a candidate, it is not only to win the debate, because that would be a Pyrrhic victory if you win the debate but lose the election. It is to use the debate as a fulcrum for winning an election and to get something done with respect to an issue position, with respect to isolating your opponent in a particular area, goading that opponent into an injudicious response, whatever it might be. But it should be something that has relevance to the campaign, and that's true for everybody in the campaign. For the press, it's typically to try to find something new, get news out of that debate, and ideally news that hinges on conflict, news that gives you some sort of prurient or gaffe value.
Yes.
They screwed up. Let's see how they did it.
Right. And play it over and over and over
again. And we should talk about that, because that's very important. Even though debate audiences in the general election have built over the last 2 election cycles, they've gotten larger, reversing the trend through the 1980s and into the 1990s. It's still the case that most people will consume their debate not sitting in the back of the room and absorbing 90 minutes at a time, but hearing these 30-second chunks on the evening news as people cover the debate in the 1, 2, and 3 news cycles to follow. And that matters, because then that's the editorial sensibility and not the debate itself.
Wow. So, I mean, clearly there is a selection bias filtering through the media into the eyes of the beholders as well.
Absolutely. And there's a selection bias on the part of the viewers, because people, of course, don't want to go out there to be informed. In many cases, they want to go out there to see their candidate do well. And overwhelmingly, people who favor candidate X going in to watch a debate will come out of that debate thinking candidate X did a really good job. And people who favor candidate Y will think the same thing about candidate Y in the same debate. But this is important. Most people say that debates are the single most important influence on their choice for president.
Now, is that just, that's the socially acceptable thing to say, that, yes, I made my decision on this reasoned discourse between these 2 opponents, or are they just saying that and they're really reacting on many different ways?
It's hard to say.
Okay.
We've never been able to have a controlled experiment where we put people in a room and expose them only to a certain amount of messages and kind of messages over the course of a campaign. But certainly when we ask them that question, that's what they say. And if that's the socially acceptable response, I think we have to ask why it is. That people value at least the appearance of reason and objectivity, at least the appearance of performance arguments and evidence. And that itself, I would argue, is good for American politics.
Okay, let's move to the current day. John McCain poses the challenge. Obama's campaign responds and says, yeah, we'll meet you, but we want a longer type of exposition along the lines of Lincoln Douglas. And I know once I mention Lincoln Douglas, I'm looking for you, the veins to pop out of this. Talk about Lincoln Douglas and the appropriateness of the analogy and the appropriateness of the format, or something like that format, to contemporary American presidential politics.
The Lincoln-Douglas debates were a watershed moment in American political history, and they have been so ill-used and abused in the years since. It's something of a shame.
Go ahead.
I'm trying. It's your program. I'm behaving myself. It is interesting to see people, when we think about Lincoln-Douglas debates, they were not moderated debates. They were just the two candidates getting up literally on stumps in many cases and speaking to large audiences in open fields.
Okay, a little historical background. 1858, 7 debates. Most famous probably at Freeport, because it, in a sense, dooms Douglas in 1860. Go ahead.
It's a senatorial election. It's not a presidential election, one common misperception.
Right, and also it's not really a Senate election because the legislators chose, so they were running in these 7 districts to elect the legislators who would pick the senators. I'm sorry.
Voting by proxy, the 19th century versus the 21st.
Yep.
And that's, unless we talk about superdelegates, but we won't go there today.
No, we won't.
But it's certainly it's not what most people thought that it was in looking at it in retrospect. The other thing is the format of the debate and the context of public address at the time. At that time, political speech was one of the principal forms of entertainment. This was a good time. You brought your family, you brought a picnic lunch, you brought drink, you sat around the field or stood in the field, you cheered your candidate. You could barely hear that person standing hundreds of people away on the stump, again, literally unamplified, remember, pre-electricity. And this was great. And the transcripts of these debates would sell like hotcakes in the newspapers.
It was unbelievable.
And separately bound.
Sure.
But they were long. They were long in ways that today viewers, voters would never tolerate. Opening speeches, 90 minutes long, an hour and a half. Rebuttal speeches in the middle, a full hour. The rebuttal from the first speaker, a half an hour. Nobody would sit through this today, and it's inconceivable that Lincoln-Douglas debates, exactly as they were in 1858, could take place today.
Let's talk about the variety of formats that have been used, that are proposed for 2008, and also what you might suggest as an expert on political speech and debate. Let's talk about that.
In 1960, we started with what became the modal approach to presidential debates, press panel. You take distinguished journalists from a variety of areas, vetted by the campaign so that they don't think that the person who most hates them in the press corps is sitting at the table.
Right.
And those journalists ask questions. In some cases, that's always open season. They can ask any question about anything. What the Kennedy-Nixon debates put in place, and what has been done several times since, is to have a debate on foreign policy, a debate on domestic policy, a debate on economic policy, so that you can segment topics. Now, the press panel came under great criticism in the 1980s, particularly after 1988, when famously Bernard Shaw of CNN asked Michael Dukakis, the Democratic candidate in '88, Governor, if your wife Kitty were raped and murdered, would you still oppose the death penalty for her killer? And it was a very vitriolic question. It was obviously engendered to elicit an emotional response, precisely what he did not get from Michael Dukakis.
Right, which might have cost Mike Dukakis that didn't cost him the election, but certainly made him look like a technocrat. Instead of saying I would, want to choke him with my bare hands and kill him, but it's not civilized. He gave a real technocratic answer.
It was a horrible answer, and that's one of the things that every candidate running for office and about to debate gets played by the political consultant, say, not this, do not do this. But at the same time, it was an illustration of the press panel intruding into the debate in a way that many people thought was illegitimate, that you don't want people to one-up one-up one another with the most outrageous question, the most outrageously personal frame on a public issue.
And we've seen that in this election cycle.
Time after time. Most notably that ABC debate, which was the last of the Obama-Clinton debates.
Charlie Gibson debate.
Yes.
That was horrible, but go ahead.
Yeah. And so one of the questions has always been, how do you minimize the role of grandstanding on the press side?
Right.
How do you have a debate that is both moderated on the one hand and yet also contain the non-politician element of that debate, so that the contestants are really the ones who soak up the most time.
Right.
And if you look at any of those debate charts in this last season, who gets the most talking time in any debate? Not the candidates.
Right.
It's got to be the person asking the questions,
right.
because there are so many candidates and you always have that person asking the questions.
Right.
So we've used a lot of single moderator debates, one person asking questions of everybody. The idea is that there's no one to compete with, but as we found out with Gibson and Stephanopoulos, there is of course just trying to show that you're better and smarter than the two people who are running for office.
Right.
And that is profoundly destructive
right.
of some of the values that we want to see from debate. Debate typically elevates the perception on the part of viewers of both people on stage. So even if I went in favoring candidate X, and I still favor candidate X after the debate, I'm more likely, barring a catastrophe and huge gaffes on the part of Y, to say that Y is okay. You know, could probably do the job. And that helps too. That is undermined if you wind up with press panelists essentially arguing that both candidates fall short of some mark that they themselves never have to live up to.
And then in 1992, we have, I guess, the first town hall meeting. Is that the one in
Yes.
Richmond, Virginia, where George Bush Sr. famously looks at his timepiece?
That was a fascinating debate for so many reasons. You had three candidates on the stage. Ross Perot joined George Bush and Bill Clinton. You had the candidates on stools. It was sort of, newlywed game without Bob Eubanks. And the
That was sexual innuendo.
or the wall in the middle. But you did have approach to the audience. There was a courtship going on in a very real way. Bill Clinton was the candidate of all of the three who figured out that camera angle mattered in that debate, and you saw him frequently approaching the lip of the stage in order to engage and get one-on-one shots with the people who were asking the question. And it was brilliant. It was a turning point in that campaign, as it really cemented his image, somebody who could not only say that he feels your pain, but actually show that he has the personal experience and the emotional intelligence to back that up. An incredibly impressive performance, and one that people have subsequently studied, both to prevent camera angles that would allow candidates to co-opt that stage in that way, but also other candidates making sure, you'll notice that almost everybody now gets out of the chair, walks to the edge of the stage, and gets as close as possible, trying to create that resonance.
Okay, let's talk about McCain and Obama. Obviously, McCain feels most comfortable in the town hall format. I mean, he had 100+ of them in New Hampshire alone, and much less comfortable in lengthy speeches and more direct confrontation. What is that his ideal format, and what would Obama's ideal format be?
Hard to say. McCain certainly has made extensive use of town halls, and he's been widely praised for being very open in those town halls, allowing people to argue with them, respecting the arguments, arguing back to them in a fairly serious way, and people have
with humor too.
With
often.
humor and disclosiveness. It's hard to say in a general election campaign if that same thing would hold up, because it's one thing to be a solo candidate with an hour to burn, talking to people in a town hall, a gymnasium somewhere in New Hampshire. Quite another thing to have another candidate next to you.
Good point.
And then who's the better performer in that case? John McCain is going to have a very difficult time looking like a serious, together, articulate candidate next to Barack Obama.
Irrespective of format.
Irrespective of format.
Okay.
However, John McCain has one huge advantage here, and this is the expectations game that goes into every debate. George W. Bush in 2000 had expectations ramped down so low that simply standing behind the podium and not falling completely to pieces was a victory.
And drooling, right.
And John McCain is going to be in similar territory this year. He's going to have to get over the hurdle of proving that he can still engage at 72 by the point that he's participating in these debates, that he's still able to shoulder the burdens of the presidency and stand head to toe with this person. Barack Obama, though, has a serious minefield in seeming to beat up on the old guy. Big risk there.
Okay. Why then does McCain want 10 town hall meetings? Is that strategic, or is this, in a sense, real? Does he expect to have any number of confrontations, if you will, with Obama prior to the convention?
He'd love to have any number of confrontations. Right now, it looks like he'll probably have a dollar disadvantage in the campaign. So having free coverage at that point would be a great thing. 10 is a number that is almost certainly impossible within the time frame that we're talking about. So he'll get a bragging point. I challenged him to 10. He only accepted 3, whatever it is. So there is some stalking point there. But I do believe that in his effort to try to find where he shines best, this is where he has proven to be most effective and most comfortable. And one thing that's important for a candidate to find is a comfort zone. If that's it, at this point in the campaign, that's it.
Okay, so right now, the Commission on Presidential Debates has established 3 presidential debates and 1 vice president. First is September 26th, University of Mississippi. Second is October 2nd, that's vice presidential. The third is presidential at Belmont in Nashville on October 7th. And finally, Wednesday, October 15th, is the third presidential debate right here at Hofstra University. What are we going to see on those debates? What are they going to be the format? Standard, sort of sitting with each other for a couple and town hall approach?
The expectation is single moderator, and right now I think we'll have intense negotiations with the campaign to refine exactly what the format would be. Commission on Presidential Debates has never gotten its debates out of the gate without some modification on the part of the campaigns, either with respect to date or format or length or something.
Participation, in fact, or number.
And participation, that becomes a huge issue. And the Commission has a relatively high bar for participation, and this has become a flashpoint in American politics.
And also heavily litigated up to the Court of Appeals. Go ahead, I'm sorry. Talk about that.
It's important. And the question is, and this gets back to the function of debates. Shouldn't, if we want debates to be maximally informative, shouldn't we invite more candidates who represent a greater diversity of viewpoints, greater diversity of people, Green Party, Libertarian Party, some of the larger parties or larger minority parties in the U.S., and get them into that debate? My personal feeling is that the answer to that would be no, barring a demonstration of electoral power of the sort that the Commission now imposes with a 15% popular number
over 5 nationally recognized polls.
Exactly. So that you're not inviting people who in fact don't enjoy large support. And one of the questions here is, what does that person who may have the support of 0.5% of the electorate do in the course of a debate?
What do you mean, no Dennis Kucinich in 2012? Come on.
They have no incentive to abide by the rules. They have no incentive not to attack without responsibility the candidates on the stage. And it's hard enough to try to figure out what 2 people think in a debate. As we saw repeatedly during this primary season, you put 10 people on a stage and you have no conversation, and you don't have a good...
And you've got at most 5 minutes of conversation from all of them. It's ludicrous. How do you make it better?
Meaning, how do you get more points of view in? Or
how do you make debates more informative to an electorate in terms of their meaningful choices?
Couple of things. First, I think we have to actually reduce some of the heat while amping up the light on debates. We keep on treating these things like title matches. And, all of the spin rooms and the ancillary advertising.
And how you score debates. I mean, I read you frequently on David Birdsell gives him an A on bang, 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 bang. We'll talk about how you score debates, but go ahead.
Oh, and I resist that. I confess I'm guilty. Well. I participate. But, I try never to say who won a debate and who lost a debate, not because I'm being arch or coy, but because because I think it really isn't the case that there's one dimension of victory or defeat.
Right.
Every candidate typically gets some things done that he or she needs to get done. Every candidate typically muffs or fails to execute on some of the things that he or she would have liked to have gotten done. Now, obviously, there are some catastrophes. I mean, Dan Quayle in the vice presidential debate in 1988. Unmitigated disaster. There's no victory.
Or Stockton in the 90, what was it?
Stockdale, yes.
Oh, my God, awful. Go
Yes,
ahead.
the who am I and why am I here?
Yeah, that's a problem.
Yes,
but
that
go
was a
ahead.
remarkable sequence. But for the most part, it's more nuanced, it's more balanced than that, and we need to look at them that way. People need to talk about debates with one another. One of the things we find, if people watch immediately after the debate, I mean, my biggest recommendation to everybody listening to this today, after watching the debates you see in the fall, turn off your television set. Turn to the people in your living room. Turn to the people in your classroom. Talk to them about that debate.
Don't listen to the chattering classes.
Don't listen to the chattering classes. Now, after you've done that, you can turn them back on and see if you agree with them. But
Right.
then you'll have that core of your own ideas,
Okay.
your own evidence that you pull from that debate, because that's important. If people watch the commentators and the spin immediately after the debate, studies suggest that that's what they remember, because that's what gets reinforced.
Sure.
You get to see it over and over and over again. But if you think about it, if you talk about it with others, and that talking, that civic engagement piece, participating with other citizens in processing political information, that makes you own what you've just seen.
What else maximizes the informative effects of debate? What else can be done?
Iteration. One thing that I think, there was a fascinating series of studies that began in England in the 1980s and continued into the United States in the 90s called Deliberative Polls, where they would see people, surrogates in this case rather than candidates, but debate a proposition, and then the audience would vote and ask a couple of questions and vote and say who they liked and who they didn't. The surrogates would then take that into account and come back and argue again.
Yep.
If we found a better way to string what happens in the debates together with one another, show video, not much, but say a couple of 15-second clips. Senator, in the last debate, you said this. Well, your opponent has subsequently made these arguments. What do you say?
Right.
And try to get people to begin to connect the dots so that each debate isn't this entirely newborn, evanescent moment. It is, in fact, part of a series of campaign events. And tie it to other events. Show pages from the website, show campaign commercials. Try to get the debates to integrate campaigns and help people to see how all of the pieces fit together and make the candidates own their appeals, make the candidates try to add up those numbers for us.
Thank you. We'll have 4 debates and we'll talk about them.
Look forward to it.
Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. Let us know what you think about this show. You can reach us at CUNY.TV. When you get there, click on the bar that says Contact Us and send your email. Whatever it is. Thanks, no thanks, obnoxious, do it. Send it.